Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Back again with the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. You'd think I've said that enough times I could just get it out, but I haven't. More talking head videos. So from the bedroom, as you can see, clothes, bed, computer, podcast stuff everywhere. Tiny house problems, right? You just stick everything wherever you can get it, basically. But here answering your questions as always. And if you have questions, reach out to me. bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. Check out thealchemistcabinet.com and support our work there. Leave your comments on YouTube or reach out to me any other way which you can. I'm glad to answer your questions however I can. And I am working on volume 3 of the Alchemist Cabinet series of books. I don't know when that'll be out. I work on that typically in the winter months when the snow flies, when I don't have a whole lot else going on. And so the ideas for it are rolling around in my head. I will tell you there's going to be a lot of stuff about wood in there. There's going to be a lot of recipe stuff. And there's probably also going to be a lot of spiritual philosophy stuff in there tied to the art of distillation because, as you know, if you followed this channel, you know, I tend to lean into that kind of stuff. I run another podcast that I call If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, that touches on a lot of that kind of stuff. And for me, those worlds are not so different. So as I've said about this channel and about my style of distillation and my thoughts on distillation from the beginning, it's not for everybody. And it definitely won't always be. Not that there won't be aspects that are for everybody, but some of it's going to get a little bit off kilter from what you get from some of the other people out there. And I think that's fine. There's room for all those things out there. Hiccups, can't talk. Always got something going on here, right? But anyways, reading off the computer today on emails because I am out of ink, and ink costs an arm and a leg. And it's not really so much it costs money, it's just that there's nowhere around here that sells it, and I don't want to have to drive out of the county to go get it. So, computer it is. And as such, there's a weird light source here and a weird light source here, and I look slightly illuminated. I'm a little crazy because, you know, I had the cataracts, I had those taken off, and so my eyes are really, I have a hard time adjusting those different light sources sometimes. So, he didn't say to keep him anonymous. We'll just say George. Hey, Alan, I'm curious why some distillers prefer worm tub to shell and tube condensers. Is it due to the fact that worm tubs are wound with a lot more tubing, which removes more sulfur components, or some other phenomenon like cooling water temperature? I have heard you comment that the temperature of the spirit leaving the condenser should be kept below 70 degrees Fahrenheit, ? George, that's a great question. I've answered it to some degree in the past, but I don't mind to answer it again. Yes, so your condenser should be somewhere between 68 and 72 degrees on average. That's what you call your obtention temperature. So it's not actually the temperature of the condenser itself, it's the temperature of the alcohol as it comes off of the condenser. People will argue that, especially quote-unquote moonshiners will argue, well, Grandpappy said keep it, you know, cold and slow and all that stuff. But any real tradition of distillation throughout the world pretty much automatically recommend 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit, whatever that is in Celsius. And specifically, the reason for that is because if you ever go to a professional distillery, pot still distillery, you'll see that professional pot stills actually have an air vent on them. And that's because there are certain compounds that are volatile, more highly volatile than the rest of the stuff that you want to keep, that come across the distillation, hit that condenser, and if that condenser is running too cold, you'll actually force those compounds into the liquid as it condenses and get some off flavors or some unpleasant notes in your whiskeys that you're producing. As such, you run your condenser such that some of those things are able to stay off gassed when they come down that condenser and they blow off through that mechanism that we just discussed. So, yes, 68 to 72 degrees. Do they all want to run at 68 to 72 degrees? No. Even when they're well designed, do they want to run at 68 to 72 degrees? No. There's too many variables. It's very rarely perfect that you actually are able to pull that off. Even within the confined, controlled environments that I have in professional distilleries, it's rare that it's between 68 and 72 degrees, even if I wish it was. And even if I try to do things to manipulate it that direction, it does not always work. So I think that answers that part of your question. Moving on to why some distillers prefer worm tubs to shell and tube condensers. So is it due to the fact that worm tubs are wound with a lot more tubing, which removes more sulfur compounds? So it's actually the exact opposite. A worm tub removes far less copper compounds because it is less efficient in the way that it is shocking the distillate, or it's more efficient in a way that's shocking the distillate. I'm sorry. So what happens is, because you do have a longer coil, you have a longer length of travel, and more of it is submerged in cold water, you're getting condensation very, very quickly in a worm tub. And as such, since really, if you want to pull the sulfur compounds out of that particular distillate, you want to pull it out in vapor form. You're not really going to be able to pull much of it out in liquid form. So once it condenses, that copper is really not doing a whole lot other than staying good and cool, and that's really all it's doing. You'll see that there are places that prefer worm tubs, specifically certain places in Scotland where they want a heavier, more sulfur forward. They tend to think of that term as meaty, right? Almost chewy sort of characteristics, unctuous or savory sort of thing. And so those distillers will focus on worm tubs. I think in the United States, worm tubs were used, by moonshiners. Obviously, by early distillers, they were used for a long time because it's what they had. Often they were made out of pewter, of all things, back in the 1800s, because it was much easier to work with and much cheaper. And there was no available commercial annealed copper as well. So as far as the safety of that goes, I have no comment. Could be safe, could not be safe, depending on the amount of lead that was in it, etc. But most of the moonshiners, I think, after the 1920s, stayed with the worm tub condenser, specifically because it was easy to produce, it was easy to manufacture, it was on hand. Didn't really take a whole lot of specialized skill to make a worm condenser, as opposed to a shell and tube, where you should probably have some metal manufacturing experience to be able to do that. A shell and tube condenser is less efficient as far as knocking down your vapor into a condensed liquid, and as such, if it's made out of copper, you're actually going to be getting a lot more of that cleaning effect that copper has on sulfate properties than what you would get out of a worm tub. Now, most shell and tube condensers nowadays in commercial distilleries are stainless steel, but you'll notice that they'll have a lot of copper before that, either in the still or the still head, or potentially in the line arms, etc. Sometimes they don't. Spirits of French Lick doesn't have that, so we have to rely on using low acetaldehyde producing yeast, because the SO2 actually bonds to acetaldehyde. So low acetaldehyde means you have less SO2. It also means you have less heads, etc., because you're not producing as much acetaldehyde. So we take steps to make up for the fact that we don't have a worm, but we also don't have a copper shell and tube condenser. We have all stainless. So we have to kind of work our way around that. On the home distilling side of things, I think I did a video on this once in the way that I think about condensers, because I do have multiple different kinds of condensers. So I have worm condensers, which I love to use for moonshine style products. If it's a sugar shine, a lot of times what I like is a pot still with a thumper and a worm, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, sometimes I will do a pot still, thumper, and worm, collect all that and go back into another pot still and do a third distillation on certain things, especially oily things like sunflowers and things like that. But typically most sugar shines are going to be pot still, thumper, worm. If I'm doing something as a white spirits, or something as a double pot still spirit, most of the time anymore, I will use a shell and tube condenser, especially like an all grain whiskey, or the agave projects, or the apple brandies, etc. There are sometimes I will use an apple brandy double pot still with a worm. If I'm going for something very heavy to go into a barrel, specifically for maturation and later with blending, I'm definitely going to use a worm there. But most of the other projects, I'm using shell and tube. And really, there's not so much a whole lot of thought put into that when it's on that kind of small of a scale for me, as it's the convenience of it. I've got an old freezer. I've got flex sealed on the inside. I freeze that thing up, throw my pumps in there, and I just hook it directly up into my shell and tube condensers. They're efficient. I get exactly almost the temperature I need once it starts to warm up just a little bit, and it's all small scale stuff, right? I do also like just the old Lebesgue shell and tube condensers, and I'll tell you what I use those for. And I know a lot of people don't like them because they are very inefficient. You can't push hard. You almost have to run those on damn near a drip to get them to run right without losing some vapor, and potentially, if you're running on a burner, having a fire hazard. I like them because they're precision instruments. That's why I think of them. Go look at any lab still. That's what they have. Just straight up shell and tube shotgun condenser. That's what they have. One shell, one tube, shotgun style condenser. And the reason they have that is not only because it's cheap to produce, but also because it makes everything slow down. And by making those things slow down, you're able to very closely monitor what you are doing, you're forced to pay much closer attention to what you're doing, and as such you're able to make much more precision cuts. So if I am running something like a high proof spirit, like 170 proof, you know, we talk about my quote unquote imitation brandy, which is a sugar shine, 1 pound of sugar per gallon, a few pounds of oats and a few pounds of raisins. Sometimes I throw some bran into it. I run that up to 170, use that as an absinthe base, gin base, aquavit base, or even as a brandy of its own accord, a very, very light brandy. If I'm running that, or I'm running 192 proof, I want that shell and tube Lebesgue condenser, and I'm going to run it slow. But I'm also, you know, that's going to be a third distillation, because I'm going to have stripped it one time, doubled it one time and made cuts, and then run it a third time and make even tighter cuts and run up to a real high proof where I want to keep it at, keep that quality high. So I'm not running, you know, 50 gallons of that stuff. I'm running, you know, a 3-gallon still when I do that. So I want that precision. I want to take my time with it and really see what's going on. Overall, all three of those condensers can make great products, but there's different tools for different applications, right? Again, if you want those heavier sort of notes and those more sulfury, and sulfury is not really the right word, those more meaty notes, as they say in Scotland, or those more unctuous or savory sort of notes, as they say in Scotland, especially for something going into a barrel, on double pot still, run a worm. If you're running a sugar shine, in my opinion, pot still, thumper, worm. If you're running, you know, small scale stuff, you can get good results out of a worm and or a shell and tube condenser. But I would say with all grain, or a lot of your apple brandies that are going to go into a barrel for a short time, or it be a lighter char barrel, whatever you want to say, I like shell and tube, or shell and tube Gatling nut gun condensers. And for precision, Lebesgue condensers. So, you know, I stumbled over my tongue a whole lot in this video, and I do apologize for that. I haven't even been drinking, so I'm not sure what's going on there. I think it's just that it's been a while since I've done a video, but I hope I got that information out there clearly and concisely. I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comments. You always do. So, all right, guys, as always, reach out to me if you have questions. I love you, and I'll catch you later.